Hi, I'm Paul Edwards. I'm an independently published horror author and first and foremost, a monster fan. And today I'm going to be looking at the first issue of For Monsters Only magazine. This magazine was unleashed on the world in 1965, the same year I was unleashed on the world. And just in case you don't have your own copy of For Monsters Only issue number 1 from 1965, I thought you might like to join me as we go through it page by page and see exactly what vintage monster goodness is in here. All right, I've removed the magazine from its protective plastic. And first, let's take a look at the cover. You'll notice that this is Cracked For Monsters Only. Cracked was a magazine that was a ripoff of Mad Magazine, a very successful humor magazine, which still exists now. Cracked does not. But Cracked was basically written by Mad Magazine people moonlighting. You would work your shift at Mad Magazine, and if you still needed money for the week, you would literally walk down the street and go into Cracked's offices and use the ideas that you had discarded from your Mad Magazine job to put into Cracked Magazine. So Cracked was a ripoff of Mad Magazine. And that's appropriate that they would make this because this magazine is itself a ripoff of Famous Monsters of Filmland. This was a very successful magazine in the late 1950s and 1960s and onward. And it was kids really their only source for pictures and information about vintage monster movies. So, Famous Monsters of Filmland inspired imitators, of course, like anything successful does. Imitators like this, Fantastic Monsters of the Films. Notice it's another FM. And For Monsters Only, another FM. So you can expect that there's going to be a little more humor in this than there might be in Famous Monsters, which was already kind of silly, with puns and so forth. So let's see what we get here, okay? Monster Mother Goose, that should be good. Plus a free special bonus, Transylvania travel stickers. I already know those are on the back cover, so we'll get to those. So being mindful of how old this is, I'm going to try to be careful opening it. Notice the cover price, 35 cents. Our founder. Okay. All right. These pages were not meant to last. Letters to the editor. Kids would really write into the magazines and give little jokes or comments about monster films. Put in their artwork. Okay. Meet our staff. That's funny. That's actually not from a monster movie. That's actually from Blood of the Vampire. That's from Blood of the Vampire. I guess that's a monster movie. It's from a horror film, but it's not the same as like Frankenstein. There's Ming the Merciless, of course, from Flash Gordon. There is How to Pass a Genius. Okay. Transylvania Correspondence School. Oh, okay. Wow, look at all the great Transylvania correspondence courses you could take. Oh, sign me up, man. Lon Chaney Sr. made it into these magazines quite a bit. He was already deceased by the time this came out, but his legacy lived on. He was the man of 1,000 faces in the silent film era. I'm not sure I agree like father, like son. What happened was that Lon Chaney Sr. never wanted his son, Creighton, to go into acting. So only after his death did Creighton pursue acting. And the studios basically forced him to use the name Lon Chaney Jr., even though that wasn't really his name. And they tried to bill Lon Chaney Jr. as a master character creator to sort of echo the man of 1,000 faces motto that they had used on Lon Chaney Sr. The difference is that Lon Chaney Sr. really was the man of 1,000 faces. He was unbelievable with the makeup he produced. He's probably best remembered now for being the original screen Phantom of the Opera and the original Hunchback of Notre Dame. Oh, in fact, there's the Hunchback. That was certainly one of his greatest achievements, if not his greatest achievement in terms of makeup and in terms of performance. He did his own stunt work in the makeup. Okay. This is from Phantom of the Opera in the masquerade scene. Okay, now we're getting to Lon Chaney Jr. There he is in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. That is Bela Lugosi playing the Frankenstein monster. They had wanted Bela Lugosi to play the Frankenstein monster in the 1931 Frankenstein, but he didn't. And by this time, the 1940s, by the time they made this movie, Boris Karloff was a megastar, and Bela Lugosi's star was starting to decline. So he did take the job as the Frankenstein monster. Okay. Yep. Yep, that is Lon Chaney Jr. Oh, okay. So remember, this is produced by the same people who made Cracked magazine. So you could expect there would be Monster Comics. If you'll notice the artwork, if you're familiar at all with older Cracked magazines, you can tell that it's the same artist's handiwork here. Basically, this looks like an article that could have been in Cracked magazine and just happened to wind up here. The Mad Dog of Frankenstein. Oh my gosh. The Rolling Rocks. Remember, this is 1965. Rolling Stones were just becoming superstars. And of course, you got to end with a musical performance. I love it. This is the Werewolf of London. That's Henry Hull in werewolf makeup. That at the time was about as wolfy as the studios would let you get, although less than 10 years later, the far superior makeup for the Wolfman came out. But this was the Werewolf of London makeup, and in this film, the werewolf was still able to speak and think as a human being. It wasn't just a snarling, mindless beast. So, and he was able to be recognized as the character who he was in human form. So they say here Henry Hull as an early Wolfman. It's an early werewolf, but it's not the Wolfman. Transylvania Teehees. This was a common thing to do in the 60s. They would take a still image from a monster movie and put a joke caption on it. And there was actually a series of trading cards, like baseball cards, that came in a package with some gum. There was a series of these. Oh, this is from Blood of the Vampire also. Same as the image on the other page. There was a whole series of trading cards that were like this. Like, here's a good example. Don't move, dear. Your transistor radio is stuck in your ear. Well, that's just silly. I mean, you know, they'd just put whatever they could think of. Sometimes they were funny, but a lot of times they were just, you know, nonsense. Yeah. Monster Mother Goose. This has Cracked magazine written all over it. Monster versions of familiar fairy tales and nursery rhymes. Cracked was always a little more juvenile than Mad Magazine was. A little more kid-friendly, I guess is a nice way to put it. Another nice neighbor. Of course, the incomparable Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster from 1931. Now, remember, these pictures meant a lot to kids back then, even with goofy captions, because there was no internet. You had no way to get a picture of your favorite monsters as a kid unless you drew it yourself. There weren't specialized niche publications like these until, Famous Monsters of Filmland began the trend. And you were not likely to find any other source that would have these pictures. So kids would cut out pictures like this, anything they could get that was an image of a classic monster. Now, if you wanted a picture of the Frankenstein monster, you could Google it and get 10,000 pictures and pick out the ones that you liked best. In the 60s, you took what you could get. So these were cut out and placed on kids' walls or in scrapbooks, things like that. I was a little bit later of a monster kid. I was a monster kid in the 70s because I was only born in 65. But we did that too. A Transylvanian family album. Okay. Yep. All right. Ooh. Okay. And here's the end of the Transylvanian family album. But this is a more interesting article. Mucho Monsters from Mexico. There were quite a few Mexican monster films, some of which were dubbed in English and other languages too, and released internationally. A lot were not, but a couple of the Santo ones were. And there was a whole series of vampire movies with a vampire who was named Nostradamus, no relation to the real Nostradamus, but a vampire named Nostradamus. He had, I think, 4 of them. If you're interested in seeing those, which were dubbed into English, you can easily find those on YouTube. Start with The Monster Demolisher. That's probably the best place to start. But there was a bunch of them. But anyway, if you had already seen your favorite monster films a million times and just still couldn't get enough, your favorite Hollywood monster films, then you could resort to monster films from abroad. Well, this is kind of a spoiler, isn't it? Okay. See, these kind of things, the only way you were ever going to get these as a kid was to cut them out of a magazine like this. And then, of course, you had to make a terrible choice sometimes, because if you also liked what was on this page, you would ruin it if you cut out and kept this picture. So you would have to choose which page you wanted the picture from. The idea of just making a photocopy wouldn't have occurred to a kid because kids didn't have access to a photocopy. So these monster movies were a little more timely. Creature from the Black Lagoon was 1954. This is from the third Creature from the Black Lagoon film, The Creature Walks Among Us. That was 1956. And this magazine is 1965. So these movies were not really that old at the time. 1931, Frankenstein was. And of course, you can take a quiz here, see? Let's try this one. Going ape over the nice lady is Harry Gus. This happened in, was it The Bride and the Beast? Regis Toomey versus Bulldog Drummond. That was a detective series. Dr. Cyclops on Broadway. Or Ninotchka. I think I know. But if you couldn't figure it out, they did have the answers here upside down. Art gallery of classic chillers. You definitely would consider cutting out some of these. Great shot of Bela Lugosi as Dracula from the 1931 film. Boris Karloff basically, once he had done Frankenstein, he could write his own ticket. He was a huge star as a result of that. And one of the next major films he did was The Mummy, which this is from. That was 1932. Okay. Oh, this is from Son of Frankenstein. Son of Frankenstein is either, depending on your point of view, it's either where the Universal monsters started to go wrong, or it was the last one that was really firing on all cylinders. It was the last time that Boris Karloff played the Frankenstein monster. This was his third and final film as the Frankenstein monster. This is Basil Rathbone, probably best remembered as having played Sherlock Holmes in a ton of movies and even more radio shows. And this, although you can't tell, this is Bela Lugosi playing Igor. Okay, Igor, the character of Igor is easily the most successful retcon in all of movies. Igor was not in Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein, no matter what you might think. There were brutish assistants, but it wasn't Igor. Igor only appeared starting in this film, Son of Frankenstein. And Bela Lugosi did an awesome job portraying Igor as a cunning, crafty, creepy guy. Some people think that this was actually Bela Lugosi's best performance, his best role ever, even better than his performance as Dracula. I said some people because I'm not convinced entirely. I also think his role in White Zombie as Murder LaGrange was a great performance. Okay. Okay, a little more Crack magazine type stuff. Okay. First Men on the Moon. This is a movie. There had not been a moon landing yet. But the premise of this movie, I actually just saw this a couple of weeks ago. The premise of this movie is that the first known astronauts land on the moon and discover to their shock evidence that human beings have been there before. And then we're off to the races from there. Well, plenty of monsters in this one. Of course, you probably know what this is. The Addams Family. That's Wednesday Addams. She wasn't a teenager in the first incarnation of the Addams Family. She was, around the same age as Pugsy. The Transylvania TV scene. Nice. Yes, this is true. I Married a Monster from Outer Space really was the name of the movie. Not a great movie, but a movie. This is from Blood of Dracula. This is, of course, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. This is Michael Landon, who you know from Highway to Heaven and Little House on the Prairie. That's Michael Landon as a teenager, as the teenage werewolf. Gary Conway played the Frankenstein monster in I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. He probably is best remembered as being the captain and leader of the main characters in the TV show Land of the Giants. A few years after this, not too long after this. Oh. I'm pretty sure this is It, the Terror from Beyond Space. Okay. Brides of Dracula, that's from. Macabre Mirth. This is just another version of the bit where they take real images from horror movies and then put funny captions on them. Although this is not actually from the movie Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. This was a publicity picture that was taken in conjunction with Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Great. Chiller Dillers. These are, one-panel comics. I like this one. I realize he's an exchange student, but an exchange student from where? Notice he's a three-eyed alien. Isn't that the three-eyed alien from Toy Story? Ah. Toy Story came a lot after this thing. Okay, stationery from Transylvania. What you would do is you would cut these out and write letters to your friends or your family members or whatever. Wolfman. Okay. I don't know how you write on that one. That's a hard one to write on. It wasn't chalk. The annual Transylvanian census. I'm just guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that they use this for marketing because kids would write in, say your name and address and everything, and say like what music you liked, what your favorite dance was, which articles you did or didn't care for in this magazine, what pets you have, married, single, going steady, going unsteady, own house, castle, windmill, own car, broom, flying carpet. Do you smoke cigars, cigarettes, hams? They would never get away with putting that in a kid's magazine now. This was a very well-circulated ad. Monster-sized monsters. For $1, you could send in and get a 6-foot-tall Frankenstein. This ad ran in Famous Monsters of Filmland and other comparable magazines for years. And in case you're wondering what you got for your $1, even back in the old days when prices were much lower, you couldn't get a figure of a monster for $1, not a 6-foot one. This was a poster. This was a poster that you would put up on the back of your bedroom door. And it's clearly modeled after the Glenn Strange version of Frankenstein. Okay, in the 1960s, during the monster craze first wave, every time that they went to do artwork for the Frankenstein monster, they would make it based on the Glenn Strange Frankenstein monster. Boris Karloff had played the monster for 3 films. Lon Chaney Jr. played him in the 4th film. Bela Lugosi in the 5th. And then Glenn Strange, who was a big hulking stuntman / actor who had been in a lot of cowboy productions, he played the Frankenstein monster in House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And, you know, by that time, the monster's role in the movies was just a mindless brute. It wasn't such a great acting role, but the look of the Frankenstein monster was terrifying. And so in the 60s, they actually used Glenn Strange's likeness to portray the Frankenstein monster whenever they were going to produce him. So partly because of when I grew up, the face of the Frankenstein monster, I usually think of the Glenn Strange version. Although, of course, I'm not disputing that Karloff was the consummate Frankenstein monster. Okay, the Transylvania grab bag. Okay, those are a little goofy. Yeah. Okay. And what do you want to send away and get from the Horror House grab bag? Do you want the squirt ring? Do you want Jake the Snake? Well, the items, by the way, buy 4, get 1 free, so you can get any 5 of these items for $2. Okay. Venus flytrap. This plant actually eats bits of meat, flies, and insects. That is a real thing. But what you got, I'm sure, when you sent away was the seeds for a Venus flytrap, and it was up to you to grow it. Frankenstein monster mask. Now that I've told you the thing about Glenn Strange, you can probably see it for yourself. They always would model these things on the Glenn Strange version of the Frankenstein monster. Big inflatable toys of creatures from the limits of outer space. $1. Nice. 7 big monsters from outer space. From 1.5 to over 4 feet tall. For $1. Wow. Yeah. Somehow I get the feeling these were balloons that would not last too long. Okay, now, in these days, kids do not have, home media on which they could watch a monster movie. There was no VCR yet, no DVDs. So what you could do, though, if you were wealthy enough, is that you could send away for 8mm films, the actual reels of film like you have in the theater. And you could get a film taken from your favorite monster film. And it wasn't the whole movie, though. It was only a segment of it. For example, if you sent away for this one, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, you would not receive the whole film, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. You would get a reel of film that had the final fight in it. I'm sure that's what they were selling. The final fight where the Wolfman and Frankenstein have their knockdown, drag-out brawl, which is, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so of footage. But that was, if you were a kid, that was all you cared about, so that would be fine. Here are the prices. And then what you would do is you would have a home movie projector, which a lot of families did have, and you could watch them then. I only once ever sent away for one of these. I paid $12, I remember vividly, for the Destroy All Monsters home movie, which of course you could tell what that would be. It would be the final battle at the end of the movie. And then they wrote me back and said, we've run out of this film. Here's your $10 back. Yeah. So they didn't reimburse, the price of the movie was $10, but it was $2 for shipping. They reimbursed me for the movie, which I never got, but they didn't reimburse for the shipping. And I wonder how many kids went through that. Because what were you going to do? Put up a stink and sue them for $2? But I wonder how many kids got ripped off that way. Okay, so yeah, more of the planet. The Mummy's Tomb. That's pretty good. Now, Lion Tiger Fight. I don't know what that's from, but there were quite a few wildlife and jungle movies. Oh gosh, I'm blanking now on the name. There was a famous lion tamer who did a ton of these movies. What the heck was that guy's name? I'll probably remember as soon as I stop recording the movie. But anyway, I'll bet it's from one of his pictures. Amnica's telling me Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This movie was about 10 years old at the time this came out. The Creature Walks Among Us is, I'm not big on that movie, so I wouldn't have sent away for that. If I had had to choose as a kid, I probably would have got The Creature from the Black Lagoon movie, because that probably has the most rewatch value. Okay, more goodies. Terror Teeth. You get a Black Widow spider to scare the other kids in the neighborhood. 10 monster fingernails. Ooh. Now this is very well remembered for people of a certain age. The model kits. Movie monster model kits, only $1 each. You can find these, if you're willing to pay, you can find these on eBay, but I promise you, you're not going to be paying $1 for them. It's going to be significantly more now. Some of these had glow-in-the-dark parts to them. I don't believe these do, but some did. Deluxe over-the-top rubber masks. Yeah, weird Cyclops, horrible monster, terror Medusa, because there could be, you know, it doesn't always have to be boys that are monster kids. Girls were welcome too. And there's a monster that a girl could be. Red Devil. Terrible Witch. Werewolf. Jekyll and Hyde. This looks to me like Two-Face from Batman, and Two-Face had been created by then, but I don't think that it's, I don't think that's what they intended. This reminds me of Two-Face. Oh, see, I didn't do this. This is the condition it was in, but this is why I have to be careful with these things. Super over-the-top masks. The Chilling Caveman, the Jungle Gorilla, the Horror Zombie, Blackbeard the Pirate. And if you weren't satisfied with a monster mask, you could order monster gloves, so you'd have monster hands, and monster feet. Wow. You'd be all set for Halloween at any time of the year. The First Lady of Transylvania. Okay, and now, we talked about this earlier. We're going to get these. These are the luggage labels that you used to put on when you were traveling to get through customs and so forth. But here's the monster version of the luggage labels. I visited Count Dracula's castle. My neck hurts. Okay. I just came back from Wolfman's barber shop. All right. You would have to be about 7 years old to really find these funny. The creature from the Black Lagoon was hooked here. Yeah, today's kids wouldn't be interested in things like this. They just wouldn't find this funny. But when you had very limited access to anything to do with monsters, kids would eat this up. And so there you have it. This is For Monsters Only, issue A, but really the first issue. This magazine did not run long. I believe there were 10 issues of this that came out. And eventually they dropped the label cracked up here, but it was still a cracked production. And magazines like this came and went, but Famous Monsters of Filmland lasted for decades. Okay, listen, if you love vintage monsters and classic horror films, you really would love my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. They're available on Amazon.com. I have different monsters in different books. Each book is a freestanding story. You don't have to have read one to understand another. They're on Amazon.com, Mourner's Woods books. My name is Paul Edwards, and I hope to see you next time we're looking at a scary movie. Have a good day.